So, okay, Jesus understood himself as a reformer of his own tradition. All right? And it's always really interesting to me that when you start turning this tradition upside down, there's this sense of fear in the room. Like, are we going to get in trouble for this? Or is the Presbyterian Church in Canada going to be looking at us and reprimanding us? Don't you think that's interesting? You tell a story that's going to turn the way you think things on its head. Well, that's what Jesus did all the time. So if we are not constantly questioning and challenging the lenses that we wear, we are not living within the Jesus tradition and certainly not living within the Reformed tradition. So there's a lot in most of the parables that when we first hear, we are simply not able to completely understand. And the reason is because we're not privy to the culture. And so keep in mind, this isn't theology. So for example, I could have done a little throwaway like, okay, so remember the part where, the man in the parable was sent to feed the pigs? Well, you can imagine if you were a faithful Jewish person and you're going, oh my God, like feeding the pigs. That is a way to completely taint you according to this religious tradition. All right, so almost within every couple of lines, the crowd is hearing this at a much deeper, profounder level than we are. So you'll recall the other parable where that is so obvious. The parable of the Good Samaritan that we have illustrated in one of our windows. And the question was, well, who is my neighbor, right? The teacher of the law who's trying to trip Jesus up. And so Jesus tells this parable of the Good Samaritan. And anybody in the crowd would have known Samaritan, big enemies, Samaritan, big enemies. So you have the priest and the Levite, good, upright, outstanding people who follow the law and practice Sabbath and all the laws, etc. And they walk by the bleeding body, and then the Samaritan, enemy, shows up, picks up the body, and takes it and gets the knee. And so everyone in the crowd hearing that would have been going, like world turned upside down, disoriented. And then Jesus saying, so, okay, who is the neighbor? And for the teacher of the law to have to... he couldn't even say the word Samaritan. Couldn't even say it was, wow, it was that Samaritan. Wow, a nice guy. It was like the one who looked after his needs. So the same kind of thing is going on with this parable, all right? There's all kinds of like little nuances and things that upon first hearing we're going, oh, wow, really forgiving Father. Gee, that's great. So here is, there are some elements in this story that would have been really hard for the community to hear and absolutely unforgettable for the community. And in particular is that the father that is described in this parable sounds nothing like a self-respecting Middle Eastern patriarch. All right, so right from the beginning, in that, the sun comes up, I want half of what's owed to me, et cetera, et cetera. And everyone in the crowd would have been going, what? No, it's only the elder son that inherits. In that tradition, only the older son inherits. So already the father is breaking the rules. What do you mean giving the younger son half of the inheritance? So this younger son then goes and blows it. So right away, right off the bat, there would have been this... we don't do that. We don't do that here. And then, after going away, blowing the inheritance that he wouldn't have had in the first place, working among the pigs that would have just made him totally unclean, and dragging himself home. And the father, what does the father do? The father sees him in a distance and runs towards him. No. Men don't do that in our culture. Men in charge, who are heads of the household, do not do that. That would be, in fact, shameful. What are you, a wuss? Like, we don't do that. So, right from the beginning, as this story is unfolding, and we're learning about this father, everyone in the crowd would have been sitting there going, oh my goodness. He's acting like a woman. That's what mothers did. That's what women did in that culture. You know, the father who lays down the law and the man, it's okay, I'll look after your father. Or, don't worry. You know. You'll recall, I won't go there, it's another story, but anyway. This is a culture where the roles of men and women are abundantly clear. And it's patriarchy all the way. And what's interesting is that in this image of the prodigal son, and I don't think you can see it really clearly, Rembrandt paints one of the hands to look like a female's hand. All right? So it's a female's hand and a father's hand. So yeah, what does that do in a culture that's completely patriarchal, where women are not given any power or acknowledgement whatsoever? They are property. And then the way you have created both your religious institutions and your cosmology around God is all based on this patriarchy. And not just any patriarchy, Middle Eastern patriarchy. And here's Jesus in the middle of it saying, let me tell you a story about this father, all right, who ends up being almost female. Talk about disorienting. The older son, I think, in this story is a throwaway character. Though given the political climate in North America right now, it's clear that many of us still relate to the older brother who thinks that only those who kind of pay their way ought to enjoy the abundance of the creation. So if the purpose of the parables is to disorient the community, challenging both the cultural and the religious templates in their DNA, then what is the biggest impact that this parable would have had on the community who heard it? I already told you that. Apart from getting this really disorientating idea that there's something about God that's female and like it's like your mother and tender as opposed to big and hard and in charge, Jesus was also challenging those who had driven the tradition with a holiness code that ended up creating a community of insiders and outsiders, right? Clean, unclean, follow the laws to the max, and you were clean and you belonged if you couldn't afford to follow the laws. For example, if you had to work with swine, right? Sorry, outsider. And not just outside our household, but outside the household of God, all right? So Jesus was challenging that. The second thing he was challenging was their notion of God. He was suggesting that God, or the mystery that we call God, did not run his household like a patriarch or a father who ensured that everyone had a place and knew their place, right? I mean, if you weren't, you knew your place in the household. If you did not maintain that place, there would be consequences. So he suggests, well, that's not the way it is in the household of God. That may be the way it is in the human household. But don't think for a moment that says anything about the mystery. And so just to go like this and to get them to kind of turn it around a bit, or he suggests that, God's like a mother. You know those mothers who forgive too much, pander too much, spoil too much? So at the end of it all, and we could say lots more about all the culture and the context, but the question really is, what is it that this parable how might it continue to surprise us and challenge us? So on a personal level, and given that this is Father's Day, so I thought it would be a good parable for Father's Day, I imagine that both Jung and Freud would suggest that we all have an internal father somewhere. We're carrying around the Father, our Father with us, based both on our personal experiences of Father and also based on our projections, based on our personality. And I think that this parable then would serve as a gift to those who still carry with them either absent or oppressive fathers. Because this parable is an invitation to participate in the household of God, where God, the Father, who acts like a mother, is understood to be both extravagant and loving. And I suspect that for some people, their life's work might need to be to replace the father they never had or wish they didn't have with that cosmic Father that Jesus speaks about. So that's on a personal level. On a political level, well, we are all probably still reeling at what is presently happening south of the border. I don't know how many of you heard American Attorney General Jeff Sessions quote Romans when justifying the behavior that involved separating parents from their children when they arrive seeking refuge from other countries. Seems to me that the invitation of the parable is this. If you insist on playing the role of the householder here on earth, and I think it's fair to say that America has taken on that role. We will be in charge. If you insist on taking that power, you are required to be generous and loving. That from the wisdom and compassion of Jesus. So, on a personal level, on a political level. What about us? As a circle of friends, what might be the invitation of the parable to us? Well, some of it's kind of easy. We're called to live out of the generosity of the father who acted like the mother in the parable. And I think I have an idea that those of us who grew up listening to this story, those of us who were shaped by this tradition, have too often, instead of identifying with the father, have identified with one of the sons, right? So there are many of us who can totally identify with the righteous older brother who has worked hard and deserves recognition and followed all the rules and made our own way, and then really resents it when those people who have not lived like we have receive the generosity of the Father. Or we have identified with the other son who we can relate to because of our own experience of having been lost and then found, whatever that experience may be. But in fact, the invitation is not to play the role or find ourselves in the role of any of the sons. The invitation is to stop seeing ourselves as children of God. We're invited to be partners with the mystery. We're invited to be the Father, which means that we are called to celebrate the goodness of creation that is intended for everyone, and we are called to provide parables and images for the wider community that serve as an alternative to some righteous pecking order driven by this holiness code. And I think more recently, the holiness code really transcends the haves, have-nots, right? So that we're suddenly we find some legitimacy in excluding the have-nots because they just haven't been good models of the Protestant work ethic. And I think both Jesus and the Father who acts like the mother would say, that's your problem. That's a construct of yours. Just like the holiness construct was a construct of yours. So finally, let's not forget about what is central as well to this parable, and that is a party. The party that the father who acts like the mother throws. Why? Because that invitation to celebration and eating and drinking together is always at the heart of the mystery that we call God. So, I want you to think about the father who acts like the mother. And stop trying to identify yourself with one of those brothers. That's not the point. Think about what is holding you back from being generous and forgiving and extravagant